Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Kristen of Abbey Research, one of our good doctors. And we are pretty obsessed with the idea that everybody can be getting along a little bit more holistically than we are. Not in a kumbaya sense or in Hallmark cards, but in actually empathetically living more cohesively than we currently do. This series, which is called Welcome to My World, is in service to that idea that perhaps different people are different, and getting to know them a little bit better will help us understand the world in a richer way. So I get the chance to talk to people who are different than me, which is everyone, about something in their lives that makes them different than me, and you get to eavesdrop. It's pretty rad, and I'm having the time of my life, to be completely honest, so I hope you are too. Today I am joined by a dear friend of mine who we have known each other for 20 years, which I do not feel old enough to say that, but it's true. Megan, Eaves, and I met on an internet message board ages ago, and we've actually hung out in person a few times since, which is great and never enough. So I'm really glad to be able to have this conversation as well. Besides being one of my favorite humans, she is a London-based journalist, International Dark Sky Association delegate, we're going to get into that, and travel writer. She was the North Asia editor at Lonely Planet for 6.5 years. And by day, she writes for a lot of international media like The Independent and CNN, Culture Trip, Travel Weekly, and others. Megan specializes in travel to China and Central Asia and is now the managing editor of Visit Uzbekistan magazine. So rad. By night, Megan is deeply passionate about light pollution and nocturnal conservation and is working to develop dark sky parts in Central Asia and London. London, that's got to be a challenge. I can't wait to hear about it. To combine all of these passions, she's also writing a nonfiction travel book on stargazing, the dark, and human nature. So we have nothing to talk about. There's nothing in there. My gracious, Megan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristen. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you.
I can go a million different directions, including we'll have you back when we do our Uzbekistan week so we can talk more about Uzbekistan. But today I want to talk about this dark sky stuff because I don't understand it at all. And the last time we hung out, this wasn't part of your life. So tell me how you got into it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think it's funny because when you say that, it probably was part of my life, but it wasn't such a kind of out there part of my career and what I was actively doing. I have loved the stars and the nighttime since I was a kid. So I live in London now, but I grew up in the Southwest US in New Mexico, and it was a really rural area, you know, and I don't want to date myself too much, but in the 80s, you know, in rural New Mexico, it was really beautiful nights there. My dad was super into stargazing and astronomy, and he took us out, you know, with his big telescope and got us into it. So I have been interested in it for a whole long part of my life, but I think it kind of got a bit, I don't know, dormant. Fair. And in the last few years, so when I moved to London, I became, I started over the last 10 years that I've been here, kind of feeling more like, I really want to see the night sky. And I think I try to explain it to people in the same way. If you've grown up near the sea or the ocean and you move away from it or inland, you get that craving to be by the ocean. And it's the same thing for me with the night sky. I just need the dome of stars above me sometimes. And I started really feeling this hardcore a few years ago. And I was, as you said earlier, I was working, I'm a travel editor as, you know, my job in general. And I was thinking about like, I really want to get away somewhere that I could do some stargazing. And in London, there's a lot of light pollution. So you really can't see many stars at all. And I started thinking about where could I go for stargazing? Where could I get to that's not too far away? And that led me down all these rabbit holes about light pollution and the night and darkness and stargazing that has just kind of overtaken my life and become a bigger and bigger part of who I am and what I'm doing with my career and what I'm doing with my time. So yeah, it started with this kind of search for darkness, just as a matter of work and holidays, and it's become this big thing. So yeah, now I in the last 2 years have become a delegate for the International Dark Sky Association. And what they do is it's a conservation organization. So they're concerned with wildlife conservation and conservation of the natural world. But specifically, they're concerned with nighttime. in part, for a lot of people like me, it starts with an interest in the stars, astronomy, stargazing. But as you start to understand more about the way our planet functions, there are a lot of aspects to conservation of nighttime. The environment at night is incredibly critical to our survival on this planet, and it is important for so many species and plants and our whole food chain. And so as I started to get more interested in this, it was like, wow, there's a lot here to dive into. So I've been working with the International Dark Sky Association. I'll call them IDA from now on because it's a little bit of a
It's a
long
bit of a
name.
mouthful. Yeah.
Yeah. But IDA do nocturnal conservation. So if you've ever heard of a dark sky park or a dark sky reserve near you, that's probably something that they have awarded. So what they do is they have a program where they award places and communities that are working to preserve the night by reducing light pollution. And they do that through it's kind of similar to UNESCO World Heritage sites or even national parks. So they're given a kind of an award of, you've done the work to reduce light pollution and preserve the natural nighttime environment in this area. And then they get awarded a dark sky park or reserve and a title that way. And then they continue, to do an annual report every year to stay, keep their certification. So that's sort of what they do, but it's become so much bigger than that. And it's a whole kind of environmental conservation campaign now to kind of understand the impact of light pollution on us as people and humans, and also on our environment and on our planet. And it's quite fascinating. I mean, I can dive into a little bit of the history of this because
that was going to be my next question, is where, I mean, in my brain, this would kind of connect obviously to some, I would imagine it put some post-World War II stuff as we started to realize our relationship with the built world versus the natural world in a different way. Post-World War II, especially in Europe. And you're nodding, so I'm thinking that was maybe when the renaissance of this was.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about the history of just technology, I mean, we didn't even have electricity until a certain point. Lighting at night was something that people have used for, centuries, millennia, really, just a fire torch, to kind of find your way at night. But really, it wasn't until the invention of gaslight, which was in the mid 1800s, that people started to actually realize they could use this kind of more en masse.
Okay.
And then the Industrial Revolution happened. And lots of big companies started realizing they wanted to produce more things. And in order to produce more things, they needed people to be able to work at night. Yeah. And so it was essentially in Paris and in London, a couple of places in Europe, that this really took hold, and they were installing these gas lights inside factories. And then just as it grew into something that people could put in their homes. People lit their homes with gas lamps, and the streets of London started to be lit with gas lanterns that had to be lit every night by an actual person.
Yeah, which is shown in the Mary Poppins sequel. If anyone has seen that, that's
exactly.
Lin-Manuel Miranda's role, is he's a lamplighter. So
yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And there are actually still a few of these old lanterns that are around London, just a few of them that you can still find.
Oh, I love it.
But so that was how it kind of started. But it wasn't until, the mass spread of electricity through the world. And I should caveat that, because there are places in the world that don't have electricity.
Yes.
So we're talking really about Western Europe, North America, and the developed world, really, and Asia, a lot of Asia, East Asia especially. But the spread of electricity happened quite quickly. And as you say, it was a sort of World War II kind of era, but it was right around in then that we started to add more and more light. And so if you think about it, we've only really had mass street lighting and mass exterior lighting, or what the conservation world calls artificial light at night, ALAN. We've only had that for 60, 70 years. I mean, one lifetime, one generation. Yeah. So it's really hard to understand yet the ecological consequences of this, the health consequences of it. But we've really just lit everything up, and we've lit everything up as if it's day.
So yeah, and there's a lot, as a business owner, like I've got security lamps that stay on, and Some of that is for very valid reasons, and some of it's because my insurance demands that I do. Like, we have to have a certain amount of 24/7 security lamps. And as you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking about like my own relationship with dark after living in Northern Ireland for so long, and how different that was than growing up in Philly. And the ways I noticed differences that I don't think noticed before. And now it's something actually my husband complains about when we're in our suburbs, why did I say it like that? When we're in our suburban back garden, he'll look up and he'll just say, I really miss the sky over Oma, which was his hometown, that had very limited light pollution, especially once you left the army base. And so it's even in tiny ways, as you're talking, I'm thinking that we've experienced it as well in our little marriage.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's so fascinating to me about it is it's something that we just completely take for granted, because you flip a light on and you don't really think about it. Yeah. It's just such an integral part of all of our lives that we don't even think about it. It is second nature. It's just there. It's part of our ecosystem as humans. And but what we're starting to see now is that actually some of this excess light can have really negative effects. So first of all, it really disrupts a lot of wildlife. And I'm talking about not just foxes and nocturnal animals that we think of, but also insects, pollinators that work at night like moths. And it sounds crazy to talk about like worry about moths, but moths are critical in other small pollinating insects that essentially make our food chain function. Without them, we don't have a food chain, and then all sorts of plants, and also our human selves. We need night and dark. We need to sleep. There are lots of studies that have started to link excess light at night to human health conditions, from things that you might expect, like obviously insomnia, but all the way to sort of more kind of critical things like high blood pressure, depression,
and people are talking
cancer.
about a lot of like blue lights and lights from our phone. But what you're saying is that it's even beyond that. It's not just that we're falling asleep with our phones so much. It's that there's too much light, full stop.
In full stop. And there is a spectrum. So light comes on a spectrum, from sort of red light, which is long wavelength light, to blue light, which is really short, sharp wavelengths. Blue is like white light. It looks kind of like white light to us. So that like really bright, blinding light that's your blue white light. That is the worst and most damaging kind in terms of health effects. Okay. So when we're thinking about lighting, it's not just like we're not here to say, let's just turn off all the lights, because that's not feasible. And also we don't want that. No. Light is beautiful and it helps us, and it makes things, it helps our lives and our technology.
Yeah. And like, if you've got to do, like, we need to keep doing surgery, and you really shouldn't do that in the middle of the woods with natural sunlight. So like, let's make sure we still have light. Like, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But there are a lot of modifications we can make, and just thinking about, sort of, it's like plastic. Some of it is good, and it's great to use it, and it's an amazing technology, but also it does so much damage, and we use it to excess without thought. So that's kind of where this conservation effort is going, and what we're thinking about in that community of people who are looking at light pollution and thinking about how do we make this safe. And so I'm working in a city that is one of the most light polluted places in the whole world.
No joke.
And I've just recently, at the end of last year, I started a new community group here, like a community advocacy organization called Dark Sky London, that is seeking to kind of tackle this head on. Because what's so wonderful about the IDA, their work, is that they have been preserving places that are still dark. It's a bit like US national parks, These places, they're still pristine, let's keep them that way. Okay. And what we need to do now is start to look at the problem areas, the places that are causing the most light pollution, and those are urban areas and cities. So if we can make changes, no one is asking to turn off all the lights in London. That's ridiculous. But there's so much we can do. You can change the way that your light fixtures are on your home to create little shields on them, so the light points down. You just want the light to go where it's needed and be used only when it's needed.
Okay.
So
like
using
timers would be a great thing. Okay.
Timers, exactly. Timers, you can change the bulbs in your light fixtures now to use warmer tones. So those are a little bit less disruptive to circadian rhythms and insects and birds. They're not totally non-disruptive, but they're better. So there are lots of little things we can do, but it's, for me and for the community I'm working with now, it's just about like, people don't know this yet. This is such a new area of conservation and a new area of research, really, that it's a matter of kind of understanding it ourselves and getting the word out. So I really appreciate being able to come and talk to you as well, because yeah, it's just a new thing, and it's a thing that every person interacts with light in some way. But it's also led me down these amazing kind of personal and philosophical questions about light and dark, and the metaphor of light and dark, and thinking about it in that way, because I do think, like, as humans, we have this ingrained fear of the dark, right? I don't know if you do, but I do, certainly.
A lot of people do, and it's definitely, I think, especially in the last couple of years, as we've had more conversations about true crime, I think there's been a bit of a spike of fear of the dark. I mean, the number of I'm thinking of, just on my true crime shelf, the number of books that mention darkness, and the connection we make between crime happening at night and under the thing of darkness. I think it's very, very real for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And there's so many different studies about this and what the correlations are or aren't between lighting, because we can say, okay, darkness could potentially be a scary place to be. And that's something that's kind of built into our DNA, as beings that might have been hunted at one time in the long gone past. When you look at statistics, a lot of times actually they don't really add up to the conclusions that we have made about darkness and lighting and the way that we light things. And in actual fact, a lot of times lighting can be worse and more blinding to you, so that you can't see a predator coming at you, for example, if you're blinded by a light. So it's interesting, this is a discussion, and it's something that I think about in my head all the time, of, the way we talk about darkness and the way that we talk, especially in the Western and kind of Christian side of the world, we think about darkness as a metaphor for evil. And when you look actually at like Chinese philosophy, they don't. They think of, have you ever seen the yin yang symbol, the kind of black and white? So Chinese
many
philosophy,
college tattoos, yes.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a fundamental aspect of Chinese philosophy, and they think of light and dark as two coexisting important pieces of balance to create balance in the world. And we need that on a kind of physical level as a planet, as an ecosystem, but also there's this kind of spiritual element to it, or philosophical element to it, that I have been considering in my life for the last few years. And it's quite a fascinating thing. So I've been trying to think about that, and sort of what I'm tackling in the book that I'm continuing to write slowly about this topic.
That's fascinating to me, because even when I hear non-Chinese practitioners, so Western practitioners, talk about the yin yang symbol, they are often talking about it still from a Christian moralistic perspective. I'm realizing, as you just said, that there's still a, like, white as goodness, dark as badness, and that we're almost having like a Star Wars conversation where there is good and bad in each of us. And that's not really what they're saying. They're saying that that there is, it's not a moral judgment, that there is, it's not even that we're talking, what it sounds like to me, about lightness and darkness themselves. What the whole point of it is to talk about balance.
Exactly. Exactly that. And if you look at the yin yang symbol, it's a circle, right? And it has, half of it is kind of a semicircle of white with a black dot in the middle, and the other half is black with a white dot in the middle. And the idea is that there's light within dark and dark within light, and they both interconnect and join up in a way that creates perfect balance. And a lot of it is just drawn from the natural cycles of our universe, our world, our planet is very cyclical. We have, parts of the month when we don't see the moon, when the moon doesn't reflect the sun's light. And then we have parts of the month when we see a full bright moon that's reflecting all of the sun's light onto us. Then we also have days, and half of our 24 hours is under, well, it depends on what time of the year and where you are in the world, on the planet. But generally speaking, half of the day is under bright sunlight and half of the day is theoretically totally dark. There's no moral aspect to that. It's just simply a reflection of our natural world. and the way that our world exists. But I do think that there is a strong sense of villainy about darkness and the concept of it.
Yeah.
That is actually, you know, for me, from a kind of personal and philosophical, spiritual perspective, I've actually found that the so-called darkest times of my life to be the ones that have been most transformative, most important for me.
Yeah.
The times that you spend really considering yourself, re-evaluating yourself, and making huge and important changes in who you are and how you approach the world. Those times are really important. Like I spent a lot of time reading about this sort of the dark night of the soul and these kind of ideas that darkness is actually really important for us on a personal level as well. We need those times of quiet, rest, peace, non-action. And if you look at the Chinese philosophy of this, yin and yang, so yang represents the white, the bright, the sunlight. And it kind of, if you take a dualistic look at masculine and feminine, they would call that kind of the masculine energy. So it's the productive, the doing, the active. And the dark is the rest, the rejuvenation, the peace, the thought, the feminine. So sort of on the, you know, if you're looking at it in that dualistic way, not gender, but, you know, that sort of
yeah, no, it makes
way.
sense. I have a colleague who is doing a lot of conversations right now around moon cycles in her own self and figuring out moon cycles. But and I need to connect the two of you because she's coming at it from a really different perspective, but you guys are kind of paralleling your thoughts. So I'll do that offline. But when you said the darkness, it reminded me of my very favorite poem of all time, which is Mary Oliver, in which she says that, you know, years ago, somebody gave me a box and it was full of darkness. And it took me many years to realize that it was a gift.
Yeah.
And we could unpack that for ages more. I'm going to hit pause on us right now, though, because I want to respect your time and the fact that if we keep talking, we will not stop. We've hit the point now where if I don't stop, this is one of our 12-hour pub marathon days.
Yeah.
So let's absolutely. Here. I'm going to definitely have you back to talk more about Uzbekistan and tell us a little bit more about some of your travels and the culture and the beauty that you found there. But if any of you would love to get involved in the Dark Sky or connect with Megan on anything else, all of her socials and the Dark Sky website and everything else are going to be below this so that you can get involved in this. In the meantime, go out and buy some duller, more warm-toned outside lights, and let's start protecting the moths that I loathe, but I will protect them. And just I'll do my bit, Mego. I'll do my bit.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure to like it. It really does help. If you'd love to hear more conversations with fascinating folks, subscribe to this channel. We also have conversations with myself and Dr. Erin, where we talk a lot about what empathy and understanding can look like in stuff like Bridgerton and the movie Promising Young Woman, and how do we interact with art to help us tell our stories a little bit better. If you like to read books, Megan does, I do. We're all bookworms around here. We have a separate channel called Abby Research Reads, where we read books about equity, empathy, and inclusivity and help you kind of along your journey in that way. Lots of ways to get a hold of me, lots of ways to interact with Megan as well. And we will make sure that those are all in the show notes. Guys, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Welcome to My World.